Whoa, what is it good for? Welcome to Science Sci-Fi, connecting the public to science and technology through storytelling. In this episode, we will discuss the space arena of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, SpaceX, Starlink, and Roscosmos, following an article I wrote on Quora with over 200K views. Then we will also analyze how future wars may look like when they take place in space, with some science fiction and fantasy TV examples. And if you stay to the end, I will tell you my personal war story. Most of you don't know that, but I was an NCO in the Israeli Air Force Intelligence during the 1991 Gulf War. That was the first war where space played a significant role in a war. Stay tuned. Russian invasion of Ukraine started on February 24, 2022, but the space arena part of the war started a little before that. On November 15, 2021, Russia conducted an experiment. They launched a rocket, a PL-19 NATO system that is designed to intercept missile, but also to intercept satellite. They blow up one of the Russian-owned old satellites. They use an anti-missile satellite test, and this created a vast amount of debris. About 1,500 of them were trackable. It was all over the news. It even threatened the International Space Station, and it attracted a lot of noise. Back then, we didn't understand exactly why Russia chose this experiment to be done exactly at that particular time. But now, following the invasion of Ukraine, we know that Russia was trying to create a deterrence. They basically told the West, look, we have the ability to destroy satellites, so don't push us. I just want to add that if war will ever come to space in a full scale, and we have lots of anti-satellite missile exploding in the exosphere or in space, in orbit around space, that could create a huge debris all around Earth that's going to basically make all space exploration void and null. It will be nearly impossible to launch satellites to space to orbit because there is a high risk and high danger of hitting some kind of debris and being destroyed, and also to send missions and spacecraft away from Earth will be a very extremely difficult task because it will have to go through the field of debris. So this is definitely something we want to avoid. And Russia was telling us, don't push us. Now let's go to Elon Musk, SpaceX, Starlink, and all the rest. On February 26 on Twitter, I hope I'm not going to butcher his name, but Mykola Fedorov, the Vice Prime Minister of Ukraine, tweeted that he is interested, that a plea basically to Elon Musk, asking for Starlink to be activated in Ukraine. This was following the Russian bombardment that destroyed a large portion of the infrastructure in Ukraine, including the telecommunication infrastructure. So they lost a lot of internet connection and stuff like that, and they needed some form of connecting. And Starlink, it's a constellation of currently over 2,000 satellites, is able to provide internet connection almost everywhere on the globe. Elon Musk's tweet was Starlink is now active in Ukraine. More terminal en route. That means now Ukraine has about 5,000 terminals. The Ukrainian government and the army and even some civilians can connect to the internet from almost everywhere. He also made some justification to the software. So if there is a power outage, you can use the terminal from the car lighter. So it is allowing, given the distracted infrastructure, internet connection throughout Ukraine in any place that have the terminal. Those terminals indeed arrived, as we can see here on the tweet, but that's not the end of it. There is more. Also, it seems that because of the Starlink become such an important component to the Ukrainian army and the Ukrainian government, a Russian artillery, and they try to target vehicle or building or anything they see that had the dish, because for the Starlink you need a satellite dish. If they saw the dish, they try to destroy it because this was the Ukrainian internet connection. But that was not all of it. Elon Musk said that Starlink and the activation on the cybersecurity, everything related to Starlink in Ukraine is going to take the highest priority for SpaceX, and that may even delay some of Starship and Starlink version 2, that's a future version of Starlink development, in order to facilitate the infrastructure of Ukraine during the war. Also, he said that he's not going to censor it, so he even allow Russian people or Russian TV and content to be streamed online through the internet. And he also said that he sympathizes with people of Russia who are not involved in the war. So he's not throwing Russian people under the bus. Then it's got even weirder than that. At some point, Elon Musk in Russian, right here on the tweet, he basically invited Vladimir Putin to a duel, and the winner will take Ukraine. Of course, this was just a gesture. Putin had no intention at all to fight Elon, but it generated public opinion. In addition to that, SpaceX offered one of Starlink's biggest rival, OneWeb, an ability to launch their satellites to space. Previously, OneWeb, currently owned by the British government, they contracted Russian rockets to deliver their satellites to space, and they wanted to compete with Starlink. But because of the sanction on Russia, they were unable to use Russian spacecraft or Russian launch system anymore to launch their satellite. And SpaceX and Elon Musk agreed to launch OneWeb satellite as well on spaceship Falcon 9 rockets. Then he issued a statement, Elon, that Russia cannot take down Starlink 2,000 plus satellites. If you remember earlier, we spoke about Russia launching anti-satellite missiles. So anti-satellite missile can create a lot of debris. It can destroy a satellite. It can destroy even a few satellites. But Russia don't have 2,000 more such rockets, so they cannot destroy the entire Starlink infrastructure. At least it's not going to be an easy task. They cannot do it with one or even with 10 rockets. You need a huge number of rockets, and they can't do that. And moreover than that, Elon Musk said that he's going to launch more Starlink satellites. He expects 4,200 Starlink satellites within 18 months. He likes the number 420 for some reason. I don't know why. Ukrainian forces, I saw on the news that they now use Starlink, the same satellite communication, internet from space, to control drones. And those drones goes on missions to destroy Russian tanks and trucks. Other than SpaceX and Starlink, Russia has other involvement in space. Dmitry Rogozin, the Roscosmos head, he threatened that the sanction on Russia could cause the International Space Station, the ISS, to crash. The reason for that is that the Soyuz rockets had brought fuel to the International Space Station, and they also used their own propulsion to bring the space station to a higher altitude, because in time because of some molecule, the thin atmosphere, it slowly slow down, and every few months it needs a boost to go back up in order to not crash into Earth. And he threatened that it's going to stop doing it. SpaceX, of course, said that they will join the task and help save the International Space Station if such a case will occur. We still have a few months, so we will see. Additionally, Rogozin threatened to leave NASA astronaut Mark Hay in space. he was contracted, NASA contracted the Russian Roscosmos to deliver astronauts to the space station and back. Elon Musk said, yeah, if this is going to happen, then we are going to send Dragon 2 on Falcon 9 and bring him back to Earth. But eventually Russia, they honored their contract and they did bring the Mark Van de Hey back to Earth on the Russian Soyuz. Another gesture that just showed that not all Russians are in favor of the war and the invasion of Ukraine. The last Russian that arrived to the International Space Station, for some reason, they wore a coverall with the Ukrainian flag's colors. So it was maybe intentional, but I don't know about it. This was a summary of the current conflict in Ukraine, at least what we saw on Twitter. And we're going to analyze right now the different aspects of space war. Currently, we have three types of main asset in orbit around Earth. And when you say we, I'm talking about the West. First, we have telecommunication satellites that are satellites that have internet communication, TV, radio, etc. Starlink is such an example. That's the most robust telecommunication satellites, but there are other satellites, many of whom are in geosynchronous orbit. Other type of satellites we have in space are reconnaissance satellites. I'm talking about spy satellites. Those are extremely important in a time of war because they detect army movement on the ground. If somebody is planning, now, right, for example, that the Russians are talking about perhaps try to capture a big chunk of the Ukrainian army in the east part of the war, of the country. So spy satellites can tell you where the forces are currently at, what are they moving, what kind of component, what kind of missile, what kind of tank. There is a lot of information that can be conveyed using reconnaissance satellites. And the other type of important satellites are navigation satellites or GPS. Everybody who have a car and use a GPS to navigate know how important those are. They're also important in wars. Why all these assets are so important? Let's just talk about reconnaissance satellites. Imagine that in World War II, the Axis power had reconnaissance satellites, spy satellites, similar to what the West have now. During the Battle of Midway, for example, they would know that the Americans are laying a trap for the Japanese Navy, and they would be able to, instead of bombing Midway, they will go directly to the American carrier and sink them, and thus win the Battle of Midway and perhaps even World War II. The same thing happened on the Eastern Front during the Battle of Kursk. Back then, the Allies had the advantage because they had the Enigma machine, and they knew that the Germans are planning an attack on Kursk, so they warned the Russians. The Russians have a few months to prepare, and when the attack Operation Citadel eventually took place and generated one of the biggest tank battle in history, the Soviet Union were able to repel this attack and cause a huge casualties to the German army. Other assets, so you see that it is very important to have assets in space. They could turn the course of the war. They had been turning the course of the war of Ukraine, both in spy satellite that probably the American, I don't know about it, but I assume are giving this intelligence to the Ukrainian army. And in addition to that, Starlink, what we talked about earlier, providing internet connection to Ukrainian forces that can help them stay in contact with other forces and also to control drones. Other assets in space that we want to protect are the International Space Station, Space Telescope, etc., etc. What other future conflict can you expect in space? Well, in the not too far future, perhaps in 10 or 20 years, we are going to have a base on the moon and perhaps even a base on Mars and maybe some mining operation on the moon, on Mars, and perhaps even on the asteroid belt. It seems that right now there is a new space race. It's starting to develop. On one side, we have the West being led by the United States. And on the other side, we have China, which probably right now are going to collaborate with Russia. And they are very aggressive, and at least China, in building a new space program. They are building a few space stations right now in orbit around Earth. And they are planning a moon mission and a moon base and even a Mars base. There are some scarce resources on the moon that we may have some kind of conflict over or standoff. One of them is water on the moon, because bringing water to space is very expensive if you have to launch it from Earth. And the moon has, in some craters near the South Pole, some ice field, and there could be some conflict around those ice fields, and who will control those? Will it be the United States or China with the Russian allies? And there are other resources on the moon, like helium-3 that may be used for fusion reaction. There is one place on the dark side that have a large deposit in thorium that may be used for nuclear reactors. So we may be able to see some kind of conflict or some kind of competition similar to what we saw during the age of exploration, when Britain, France, and Holland were fighting over India and North America. Of course, Spain and Portugal were also involved. So to try to control those colonies, we may have some similar conflict in space taking place in a few decades. I don't know. Some TV series that talk about a new near future potential space conflict or space standoffs. One of them is Space Force, a Netflix original. It's a comedy. It's not related too much to space. It's more like it's a comedy about similar to The Office. But in some parts they have, you can see on the bottom here, they had some standoff with China. China built a base on the moon, and they'll drive over the American flag, and they came to the moon, and they had some conflict. Eventually they resolved it. Another TV series that I would recommend is For All Mankind on Apple TV. It's an alternate history. What would happen in the original space race from the 1960s, early 70s didn't finish. It started with the Russian or the Soviet Union being the first to land on the moon, and both the US and Russia continue into the 1970s and 1980s. And at some point, both superpowers had moon bases, and they had some kind of conflict near the craters that had water, and it even has some casualties. So in the picture below here, you see some image from For All Mankind, where American astronaut brought AR-15 or M16 rifle to the moon, painted white, of course, and they had a conflict with the Soviets on the moon. Now for my personal story. In 1991, I was in the Israeli Air Force. I was an analyst. I was stationed in a base someplace in Israel. Israel was not really involved in the war. The war was after Saddam Hussein and Iraq. They invaded Kuwait, took over Kuwait, and the United States, with a coalition of other NATO members and Arab countries, started the war with Iraq in order to take over Kuwait and free Kuwait from Iraqi forces. Iraq was not happy about that, and what they did, they fire missiles, Scud missile on Israeli, on cities, Tel Aviv, Haifa, and they try to incite Israel to react and bomb Iraq. And the logic was that if Israel will attack Iraq, other Arab countries that participated in the war together with the Americans against Iraq, like Syria or Egypt, will find it very difficult to continue helping the allies when Israel is also involved in the war. So eventually Israel didn't fight back. The only part of the Israeli military that was involved in the war was where I was, that was the Israeli Air Force Intelligence, and of course the air defense missile, the anti-aircraft missiles. The Israel had a few Patriot batteries that intercepted the Scud missiles that were sent from Iraq. So, in 1991, before the first missile attack, I was stationed in a base, as I said earlier, and then in the middle of the night, I got a phone call. I answered the phone and I heard somebody talking to me in English. It was a lady, she spoke English and she sounded very panicked. She said, "Hi, my daughter is in the base and I heard there is an Iraqi missile are flying to Israel, it said so on CNN." And I told her, "What are you talking about? This is the Israeli Air Force intelligence. There are no missile coming. Everything is quiet. Everything is cool. But CNN said that the missile attacks are taking place. I don't know what you're talking about." And then started the sirens. What happened, the missile, when it fly from Iraq to Israel, it took the missile 4 minutes to fly. On the first attack, when the American satellites detected the launch, they have satellites in orbit that can detect launch. The signal went to the US and it took them 2.5 minutes to get an approval to transfer this information to Israel. And then transferred the information to Israel about 1.5 minutes before the missile struck. And that's when the sirens start. For some reason, I don't know how it is possible, the CNN knew before Israel that Iraqi missiles are flying toward us. That's my little story. Later on, we got the information a lot sooner, so we had the 4 minutes warning, but the first attack, we only had a 1.5 minute warning, and CNN knew before us. That's my tiny little war story, and thank you for watching the presentation. If you want to follow me, this is my Twitter handle. You can check my blog, Spacefaring Civilization. They had the Quora article over there with over 200K views about Elon Musk and Starlink helping Ukraine. And there are other ways to support the channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. See you on the next episode.